Michelle Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us from Washington, D.C. today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Well, COVID-19 has had an effect on people's health and their finances. Has any of those factors in particular played a bigger role in what's happening in relationships in the year 2020?
Sure. What I've seen during the pandemic is basically that the pandemic was the straw that broke the camel's back. I mean, people may have been going along with their typical day-to-day with their spouses, but when they were forced to suddenly spend days on end, months on end with each other, a lot of those issues that couples previously had swept under the rug suddenly came to the forefront, and you were literally forced to deal with a lot of the things that you had just ignored going on about your business. I mean, a lot of couples had outlets such as happy hours or going to the gym afterward, brunch with friends, even church, and all of that was suddenly just taken away from us basically overnight. So what I saw was that shortly after the courts started to reopen, around the middle of the summer, the phones were just off the hook. And I've seen that throughout with my colleagues as well as a lot of the most recent research shows that there was about a 30% uptick in calls and divorce filings post the pandemic, as soon as the courts began to reopen. And so it's basically a matter of people just couldn't take it anymore. People often say you can't put a price tag on peace, and that's essentially what I saw. And so it was something sometimes as basic as boredom with the spouse. Sometimes it was conflict over the children that drove the wedge between the parties. And then you add to that the furloughs and the financial stress that a lot of people are in. And it was truly just a perfect storm. And unfortunately, we really barely even recovered from the first so-called wave of this pandemic or virus, and we're heading right back into it again. And so parties, it's just this constant stress and pull on a lot of families that has just made it almost unbearable. So there's definitely been an uptick for a lot of, I think, divorce practitioners over these past few months with people that just cannot take it anymore.
Oh, that's terrible to hear that. That's unfortunate. But what about the cost of divorce? I mean, getting a divorce is expensive, and also sometimes it takes years. I mean, your case can be tied up in court. What are you seeing in terms of that, the cost factor and the time that it takes from the time you actually go see an attorney to the time you officially get that divorce paperwork? What's that time looking like, and what's the cost looking like?
In short, it's long. So unfortunately, people need to be prepared to wait. When you think about it, there were several months where the courts were closed, and so they were backlogged. All those cases that were put on hold between March, April, May, June, all the way through about the middle of the summer, then had to be rescheduled. So if you're just starting to either contemplate filing for divorce or just starting the process of getting into the court system, you definitely should expect to wait, which is why I often suggest to people to consider alternatives to litigation, such as mediation, meeting with a neutral third party who can try to help you resolve your issues and resolve the conflict without the court system. Try communicating, talking to each other, trying to figure out how you can best resolve whatever the conflict is. Seek even advice from counselors, whether it be marriage counselors, pastoral counseling. There are a lot of alternatives out there that people can utilize before they jump right into the court system. Because if you jump right in, you should absolutely be prepared to wait. The process has been prolonged, and certainly to no one's fault. It's just that the courts are backlogged. There's only a certain number of judges, and so your case is probably, you're looking at probably next year, well into the new year, before you even get before that court system. At least that's how it is in the Washington, D.C. area. In terms of the cost, divorce can be costly. I mean, a lot of people say it's cheaper to keep her, right? I mean, that's just sort of an understood component of divorce proceedings. Unfortunately, it can be a costly process, which is why, again, I always suggest that you exhaust all of your measures to try to settle your case outside of court, reach an agreement on all the legal issues arising from your marriage, such as the finances, alimony, spousal support, child custody, child support. Try to resolve those issues, because divorce can definitely be costly. But like I mentioned earlier, you can't put a price tag on peace. And that's what a lot of practitioners have seen in the last few months, which is that people are calling and saying they want out now, that it's not worth the wait. And so, unfortunately, if you do find yourself in that number where you just can't, you've tried and done all you can't take it anymore, be proactive. Do try to consult with an attorney if you need to, just to gather information, figure out what your next steps are, discuss the alternatives to the court process, and see what you can do to try to make it an amicable process, and certainly as an expedient process if at all possible. But if you wait or rely on the court system to decide, you're probably going to be waiting quite a while.
Well, we've heard that in many states around the country, actually. Real quick, what about legal separation? Is that effective? Is that useful? Is that sort of a thing of the past? What are your thoughts on legal separation?
Sure. How legal separation is defined, it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So you definitely need to seek an attorney's advice in your jurisdiction where your case may be pending. But nonetheless, sometimes if people just physically separate for a period of time, if that's even possible, to give themselves some space, maybe explore options like counseling and see if this is really the right next step for you. Sometimes that space is what can help even save the marriage, quite frankly, because again, it's been the lack of space over these past several months that has driven a lot of couples toward divorce court. So it is a thing, people do separate. And just because you separate doesn't mean that you are definitely going to proceed with the divorce. It just means that you're taking some time apart, trying to sort things out, and maybe you move to the next step, maybe you don't. But space, a lot of times, is what's needed and has been needed over these past few months for a lot of couples to just allow them to think through what they want to do and what their next steps are. But legal separation, there are legal definitions of it. So you definitely want to consult with an attorney in your area to make sure that you're adhering to whatever that means in your area. But it is a thing, and it's something that can be considered before you jump to divorce court and filing for the absolute divorce.
All right. Well, we thank you so much for that advice, Michelle Thomas, a Washington, D.C. attorney. We appreciate your time and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, you too. Thanks for having me.